What's up, guys? My name's Brandon, and welcome back to Apple Weekly. In this episode, we're going to be discussing even more new iOS 26 changes. We're going to talk about the major shift in Apple's software, an update on the long-delayed Siri revamp, Apple's refreshing new stance on Apple Intelligence, and more. And before we get into it, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below to make sure you don't miss out on any new iOS 26 features and changes over the next several months. Okay, so before we talk about the new features in iOS 26, I first want to just talk about WWDC 2025 because I think this was one of the best WWDCs in a while, in many years, because it was basically no filler. There were no AI promises that were not going to be here in the first beta. There was just a lot of software features, a lot of change with Apple, and it just seemed like there was not a moment where I wanted to look away from my screen, and I haven't felt that way in quite some time. So I think that WWDC 2025 was a major success, and we also saw Apple's big shift with their software because now everything is named OS 26 after the year 2026. So let's talk about that design because I don't think I've ever seen so many people on social media talking about the design of software more than after Apple unveiled the liquid glass design. As you can see here on my home screen, I think it looks stunning. Now, I don't always use the clear icons like this, but I think that a lot of people are just looking at the icons and thinking, oh, this is like Windows Vista back in the day. It's like, it's not even the icons that make this design so special. It's when you go inside of settings and you start to see the interface, the UI elements, you see the buttons, the animations, it's all the really subtle things, the small things. If you go back to my home screen and you start shifting right here, you can see the glass kind of refract, the light refract off of the glass icons. It's the little details like that. When we pull this down, you can see the glass kind of moving. Look at that little subtle animation there. It's stuff like that. It's like melting. The icons are like melting into this little transition here. So those are the things that make the design so special. It's not the icons. So I'm a big fan of liquid glass. I think it might just be my favorite design language yet from Apple. So what do you guys think about this design overall? Are you a fan of it? Are you not a fan? Let me know your thoughts below. And here's another thing about the design that a lot of people didn't realize is that we do not have the home bar down at the bottom anymore in applications. So now the applications basically take up the full screen and we don't have that intrusive home bar at the bottom now, unless of course you are scrolling, you'll see it for a minute, but then it will disappear. So I really love that touch. And you might have also noticed that the keyboard has changed. So Apple did actually change the keyboard to SF compact display. And I have to say that the numbers on the lock screen really grew on me. I wasn't a huge fan of the glass look for these numbers right here on the lock screen, but that little animation you just saw right there, and the fact that you can make these larger and kind of more elongated, I really love this look, especially when you pair it with a spatial scene, a spatial photo, and you kind of turn your phone and you can see it. It looks 3D, especially with that glass-like look in the font. It's just awesome. And it seems like most people are a fan of this redesign because I did ask on my Apple Den newsletter that went out yesterday morning, which make sure you are subscribed, by the way. I asked if you liked the redesign and well, you could see the results for themselves. Most people really love this design and I agree, it's excellent. But I have to mention it because there are some readability issues. I know a lot of people are complaining about the readability issues. And I have to say that yes, in the control center, I agree. Like when you pull down the control center, I think there's not enough blur in the background. So it looks like the icons are kind of overlapping with the home screen icon. So the control center toggles overlapping. It does look kind of weird with the control center. So I do think Apple will tweak that over the next couple of betas, probably in beta 2, honestly. But aside from that, the readability really is not too bad. So I have noticed that there are bugs sometimes on the notification center when you get a notification where sometimes the blur is just not there. So it's really hard to read sometimes, but that is a bug because as you can see right now, all my notifications are very easy to read. Now this is a darker wallpaper, so it does also depend on your wallpaper that you set, but I've noticed that there are bugs sometimes where it basically does not render the background blur for the notification bubble. And there are a few other instances of that as well where I feel like the readability issues are just bugs and Apple will fix that with time. Again, you got to keep in mind, this is a first beta, and don't get me started on this tangent, but I just want to mention it really quickly that social media, every time a developer developer beta 1 comes out, especially this year, there are so many people farming for clicks, just basically saying, why is the software so buggy? My phone is glitching out like crazy. Look at this UI bug. It's like, come on, this is a developer beta 1 of a redesign at that. So bugs are expected. I just think Apple may have made a mistake allowing anybody and everybody to just get the developer beta at this point. So, if you see all the FUD out there about people saying it's super buggy, it's like the worst thing ever, you guys should know better if you watch my channel, but if not, this is a developer beta 1. A lot of these things will be fixed with time. Now, before we get to some more iOS 26 features and changes, I just have to mention that Apple did push out a re-release of iOS 26 beta 1 for iPhone 16 and iPhone 15 users on Friday, yesterday. Now, anytime that we get a re-release of software, it's almost never going to include any new features. It's mostly just going to be back-end changes. And this time, we saw something pretty significant, because you can see here from Apple's release notes, it says that some iPhone 15 and 16 models might show a low battery symbol and be unable to start up after updating to iOS 26 beta 1. So quite literally, the worst type of bug was occurring on some iPhone 15 and 16 models where they literally could not even boot. You would have to restore your device. And as I mentioned over on X, this is the exact type of bug that I fear the most when installing betas, and it's the main reason I tell you guys not to install a beta, especially a beta 1, on your primary device. Now, thankfully, Apple did fix this within a week. People are not always that lucky when you face these type of bugs, but I did also want to mention that I did find that the control center kind of has a new alignment now with this re-release as well. So I'm not sure if this is like some type of placebo or what, but you can see from this side by side that it appears that the container for the control center has been moved up slightly. However, the background blur remains the same. Okay, so now let's talk about some more new features in iOS 26 beta 1. Now, if you guys missed it, I did make a video showing more than 125 new features and changes in iOS 26 beta 1. That video is linked above and down in the description, but we're going to talk about even more that I discovered after publishing that video. And the first one's inside of the control center. And if we go into our connectivity menu and we haptic press on Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, you can see that we have a new interface here for both of those. If you go into the AirPlay menu when you're watching a video or listening to music, you can see that we have a new interface here. It also comes up a lot more smoothly and quicker than it did in iOS 18. And there's also a volume slider there for each different source. So now you can change the volume without going to another menu, and you can see it kind of has an animation and it goes away and has a check mark once you set the volume. Now, I will say that these glass icons do look good on the home screen with the right wallpaper, but I really don't like how it looks inside of the settings here. So we're going to change this back to dark real quick. So we're going to switch that over to dark and go back into our settings here, because I want to talk about another feature that I mentioned in my What's New video, but I basically said I don't know why anybody would use this, and I want to clarify that. So if we go into our settings and then into general and then AirPlay and continuity, if we go down here, we have a brand new setting for keep audio in headphones, where it will keep your AirPods, as the audio source, even if you get into a car that has CarPlay or just Bluetooth in general and it tries to connect to your device. So in my video, I said, I don't know why you would want to get in the car with headphones on and it not switch over. Well, somebody on Instagram actually sent me a message telling me why, and it opened my eyes to see that this actually is a great feature for delivery drivers. So if you're a delivery driver and you get out of your car and go into your car very often and you have AirPods in, this is an excellent feature for you. That way you keep the audio in your headphones instead of it switching to a different source. And speaking of audio, if we go into the Apple Music application and go to the Home tab and we scroll down, you will notice that we have a brand new section here for something that used to not be native, but now it is. So we have Replay. So Apple Music Replay is now native in the Apple Music application. Ever since it was first introduced in 2019, it would be in the web browser, would actually not be in the music application, but now it is. You can go to your previous replays and you can see them right here as their own playlist. And I have to say that I am absolutely loving the auto mix transition feature in Apple Music. It's so much much better than crossfade in my opinion. It does not work every single time, but it's working most of the time for me, and it's excellent. It will slow certain songs down, it'll speed certain songs up, and it will just basically cut out the filler in songs to have a smooth transition to the next one. Now, I have to say that one of the biggest features in iOS 26 is undoubtedly going to be the call screening feature in the phone application. This works so much better than I thought it would, because you won't need any type of Truecaller application or anything like that anymore, because this new feature will basically ask the unknown sender to state why they're calling before it even rings on your phone. That is amazing. I tried this myself, and it actually gives you a live transcription on your lock screen when they're calling and saying why they're calling, and then afterwards it will say this right here. So this person was calling about an extended warranty, and then you can see that here. It saves it. It's not necessarily a voicemail, it's just what they said on the line when they were asked what they were calling for. And then from here, you have this brand new interface where it shows their number up top. You can add that contact, and you can also report it for spam. And by the way, we also have haptics now for phone calls. So when somebody picks up or hangs up, you now get haptic feedback to indicate that. Also in Safari, if you have the default tab view selected, you can swipe up on the address bar to go into the tabs, or you could just pinch in like so, or I guess pinch out to go into the tab view very easily. Image Playground has a new app icon, and also when you go into Image Playground and go to new image, which that button is new by the way, you can see that you can change the style. So you now have Genmoji and ChatGPT in here. So you can create an image using ChatGPT inside of Image Playground, and you can even specify the type of style that you want that ChatGPT image to generate, whether that's anime, oil painting, print, and so on. And then here's a feature I've been trying to get to work this week, but it has not worked out for me just yet. Maybe it hasn't learned enough yet, but in the Maps application, this is the splash screen that you get when you install iOS 26. So it says, know what's ahead. Let Maps access the routes you usually drive and provide updates about delays before you head out. So essentially what it's trying to do is learn your habits, and before you get up to leave to go, to work, for example, or go to the gym, for example, it will let you know ahead of time if there are traffic delays or anything like that. So again, I've not been able to get this to work just yet, but that is a new feature. And also, I don't know if this is just because regular random people have installed iOS 26 or not, but I've noticed more incidents on the road with the Maps application. So maybe there's some type of bug before preventing people from reporting and it showing up, but I've noticed more incidents, and there are also new incidents you can report in iOS 26. And here's a cool one that I didn't mention. You can now get weather data if you do not have signal. You can now get that weather data via satellite. So I talked about the call screening feature for the phone, but there's also a message screening feature that will screen unknown senders. And I just really love how this is now set up in iOS 26, because before in iOS 18, you would have like the all messages view, and you would see certain spam mixed in with your actual messages. But now you can see you get a little 1 up there in the top right if you have a message from an unknown sender. You don't get a notification, you don't show up right here in your main view. It shows it up in this little bar right there, and you can see it says unknown senders. And then if you go into that section, it will show you all of your unknown senders right there, and you have new buttons for delete or mark as known. However, the one thing I really do not like about this feature is that now if you get two-factor authentication codes, they are not on your lock screen anymore. Since you don't get notifications for those unknown senders, two-factor authentication codes, you now have to go into your messages application and go into the unknown sender section, and then you can see your 2FA code. So that is kind of annoying. You can add that, number as a known number if you want to, but it's still kind of annoying. And by the way, speaking of two-factor authentication codes, here's a pretty big new feature. So now you get 2FA codes from any application via text, not just messages and mail. So if you're using like WhatsApp or WeChat or something like that, you will now get that little pop-up that says, insert this verification code that was sent to your messages. And I also really love, by the way, if you're in a message and you can see up top where it shows the contact name, or like a group chat, it shows like 4 people right there. If it's sending a message, if you're sending a message, the little loading bar is now inside of that little interface right there. It's almost like a mini dynamic island that has that animation. It's the subtle things like that, again, that makes this liquid glass design just so awesome. If you have CarPlay in your car, you're gonna love this new feature. So now with iOS 26, you can wirelessly stream videos to the CarPlay screen while you're in park. Apple said this on their website. They said AirPlay video in car enables people to watch their favorite videos from iPhone right on their CarPlay display when they aren't driving. Integrate support for CarPlay with AirPlay video to enable this feature in your car. In the battery section in your settings, I didn't really elaborate a lot on this section in my What's New video because I wanted to get through all the features, but if you go to view all battery usage, we just have to talk about how much better this section is now. This was very confusing in iOS 18 for a lot of people, especially just regular people, but you can see that now anytime you go over a day right here, it shows the amount of battery you used. So on Wednesday, I used 34% of my battery. On Tuesday, I used 70% of my battery. On Friday, I've used 26% of my battery. So it's much easier to tell, how much battery you're using every single day. And if you go down to the battery usage by app, it will actually compare that day compared to the previous 7 days to see how much more battery life you're using compared to the past. So, and if you go back to the main page right here, it will show like the top ones right here that you're using more than usual. I just find this section in general to be so much better and more useful than in iOS 18, not to mention the great battery intelligence feature up top that shows when you last charged and how long it will take for you to get to a full charged state. Also, it's really cool because if you get below 20% battery, you can now set low power mode from this section right beneath where it shows the battery intelligence section. Now, here's a feature I've been waiting on for a long time for the wallet application. You can now change the category of a certain expense. So if I go into my OpenAI subscription right here and I go into the actual, transaction view right here under category, we can now change this. So this is not shopping in my opinion. This is a service. So now I can change that to a service and it says, do I want to change OpenAI transaction category to services? And you could do this transaction only or multiple transactions. So I'm going to choose multiple and then I can select all and it will put all of the previous transactions under that new category. Now here's one I did not expect to see with iOS 26, but we can now set a custom ringtone without using GarageBand. So you guys might know I made tons of videos on how to do this in the past, but those are all now basically useless because in the Files app, if you have an MP3 file, if you haptic press on that and then you go to Share and then to More, and then right here you can see Use as Ringtone, and it says it's actually too large. So it has to be 30 seconds. So let me find one that's a little bit shorter. Okay, so here we go. So let's go to More, Use as Ringtone, and you can see that now it will take us into the ringtone section and settings, and it's right there. So now we have our custom sound as our ringtone without needing to do all that crazy stuff with GarageBand. And if you want to delete this, you just swipe over and you can see there's a new delete button so you can delete that custom ringtone. Now, if you take a screenshot inside of Apple TV or Netflix or somewhere like that, you'll now get this new view that says protected video. So before in iOS 18 and previous versions, if you tried to screenshot some of that material, it would just give you a black screen. Now it gives you a black screen, but it also says protected video. And by the way, speaking of the TV application, make sure you guys go check out the new haptic trailer for F1 the movie. It was absolutely amazing. So if you have an iPhone, go into the TV app and watch this trailer and just feel the vibrations because you can actually feel the F1 engine. You can feel like the gear shifts, all that stuff. It's pretty impressive. I thought it was going to be a gimmick and like kind of lame, but it was really cool. I also have to mention a pretty big change related to Apple Intelligence, and that is for developers because as you guys know, at the Worldwide Developers Conference, Apple did open up the foundation models. That way developers can integrate Apple's offline, their on-device models in their applications with just as little as 2 lines of code, as little as. So it might be more, but Apple said you can do it very easily in applications, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so all the new features and changes in iOS 26 Beta 1 are great. We get that, but there's also a lot of bugs. And before I get into some of the bugs, I just want to preface this by saying, yes, I know that there are expected to be bugs in a Beta 1. I'm not complaining. I'm just trying to bring attention to these bugs so that anybody working at Apple can see it. And I've also reported all these bugs in the feedback application. So if you guys don't know, if you are new to beta testing, just know there is an application pre-installed on your device called Feedback. Go into there and report any bugs that you encounter throughout using iOS 26. That way they can get resolved. So again, not complaining, but I do want to share some of the issues I've been encountering so far on 26 Beta 1. And the first one is kind of twofold. So first off, I've noticed in the Messages application, application specifically, the keyboard is very laggy. So I've noticed a very laggy keyboard throughout iOS 26, but especially inside of the messages application. It's really bad, and it gets even worse if you set a background to your chat. So as much as I love these animated backgrounds inside of chats in iMessage, they do cause quite a bit of lag and quite a bit of heat to be produced from your phone when you do enable those. So I'd kind of recommend staying away from wallpapers here in beta 1. So one of my favorite quality of life changes in iOS 26 is the ability to swipe back from anywhere on the screen. You don't have to be on the corner anymore. You can swipe back from like in the middle of the screen to go back. However, it's caused quite a few issues when there are swipe gestures involved, specifically in the music application and in the mail application. I'm sure it happens other places as well, but if I want to swipe to go back, you can see that it actually invokes this right here. It invokes the ability to play next, or sometimes it does the opposite and it goes back instead of allowing me to, add this next to my queue. And you can see how this is an issue in the mail application as well. So if I want to go back and I swipe over, you can see that nothing happens. It just does the mark as unread action instead of actually going back to the previous view like I was trying to get to. And then of course, since we have a new design with iOS 26, there are a lot of visual bugs. So bugs that aren't really going to impact, the performance or anything, but they are visually annoying. Like this one right here where the notification bubble is like halfway cut off, and it's also not as, it doesn't match the other notifications because it doesn't have that glass look. It's like a full solid color. It's not fully solid, but it's, more opaque than it should be. And also on the lock screen, when you stretch the time up top and it pushes the widgets down to the bottom of the screen, it overlaps the focus mode right there. And sometimes it overlaps notifications as well. So there's a overlapping issue right there. There's an overlapping issue inside of sleep. So when you go to view your previous night's sleep, you can see that the search right there and the microphone are for some reason overlapping over the time of sleep. Sometimes notifications also look like this on the notification center, where half of it is blurred out, but the other half is not. And you'll also see that overlapping in music as well with the music haptics and auto mix. So auto mix and music haptics kind of overlap over each other. And then the infamous storage full bug is back with iOS 26 beta 1. This always causes a lot of laughs and a lot of confusion for people. But if you go into your iPhone storage, some users are seeing where there's just a UI bug that says your storage is almost full when there's like 1 gigabyte left. But in reality, you don't actually have that much storage being taken up and you're not low on storage. It's just a bug. But as far as bugs that actually make my life more difficult and make using the device like not as enjoyable are of course the random respring. So I have had 3 random resprings so far on my main iPhone running iOS 26 beta 1. I've also had quite a few on my iPad. So that is quite annoying, but that is always expected with a first beta, especially when there is a redesign. And I'm going to mention this as well, but I do think the control center background is also kind of a bug. Maybe not a bug, but I do think it will be adjusted so there's more blur in the background so it doesn't look so noisy. So it doesn't look like it's like stacking on top of the app icons in the background. Now, as far as the performance goes, it's not great, but it's really not as bad as I expected, given that we have a full redesign in pretty much every area of iOS. So yes, the keyboard is laggy. I'm having major issues with the keyboard lag, and also messages in general is just very slow. Even receiving messages is slow. When I get notifications, the notification bubbles come in with kind of a stutter and kind of a lag right there. I notice a lot of stutter on the lock screen and notification center as well. And then I did run a Geekbench test as well. We scored a 3472 on the single core, 8647 on the multi-core. Obviously, that is going to be lower than the latest stable build of iOS 18, which is 18.5. So don't expect great performance with a beta 1. We're probably not going to have great performance for beta 2 or beta 3 either. I would say the performance is most likely not going to be very good on the iOS 26 betas until like beta 4-ish. Somewhere around beta 4 is when we typically start to see an uptick in the performance and battery life. And speaking of battery life, we have to talk about battery life because it is abysmal in iOS 26 beta 1, and I think it's mostly because of how hot the devices get. My phone is so hot right now. I am screen recording, but I've been doing these Apple Weekly episodes for years. I don't think it's ever gotten as hot as it has been for this episode. So clearly that's going to impact the battery life. And if we go to my main device and go to the battery usage right here, you can see ever since Monday, I've been using at least 100% of my battery every single day. Like on Thursday, 187%. That is insane. And it's not like I'm using my device that much more. You can see like the screen idle time is very very high. So there are going to be issues with battery life. That is expected. I also had somebody ask me if running the beta will impact their battery health on their iPhone, and the answer to that is yes. So because your device is heating up so often while on these betas, that will negatively impact your battery health long term. So yes, technically using the betas on your main device will negatively impact that battery health. Okay, so let's talk about what to expect next. So we did get a revised build of iOS 26 Beta 1 on Friday the 13th, but when can we expect to see iOS 26 Beta 2? And I would expect that to come on the week of June 23rd. So Apple typically sticks to a 2-week release schedule at first with these betas, so I would not expect to see Beta 2 until the week of June 23rd. Now, as far as the public beta goes, if you're holding off waiting for the public beta, which probably a good idea for a lot of people if you're even considering it, that is coming in July. If I had to guess, it would be near the middle to end of July. And for those of you still on iOS 18, I would expect to see iOS 18.6 Beta 1 start to go out pretty soon, probably within the next couple of weeks, and we are still expecting an 18.5.1. If you are not running betas at all, you're only running public releases, we should see an iOS 18.5.1 at some point. We don't really know when, but we should be seeing that at some point in the next few weeks. Now, also this week, we got some new hope and kind of a new release date for the revamped Siri 2.0, as some people would call it. So this is going to be the new Siri with personal context, the ability to perform actions in apps, and different things like that. So we're now hearing from Mark Gurman over at Bloomberg that we're going to see this new Siri revamp in iOS 26.4 next spring. And if Apple does stick to this release date, which I think they will if I had to guess, that is going to be nearly 2 years after they first announced these features, which is crazy. And it's easy to criticize Apple for that, but it's actually good to see that just recently we heard about Apple's new stance on Apple Intelligence. And we kind of heard this rumored before as well, but it seems like Apple is really just not going to announce any type of features or release dates for Apple Intelligence features that are not going to be released like imminently. So this is a new stance they have. They're being a lot more upfront and honest about their struggles with Apple Intelligence. Basically, in an interview with Joanna Stern from Wall Street Journal, they opened up and basically said, yes, first off, they were saying that these features were working. It was not vaporware on stage at WWDC 2024. These personal context features were actually real. They were developed and everything, but they were just running into issues with reliability, and they wanted it to be the best without any hiccups. That's just the typical Apple fashion, and they were willing to scrap it and kind of just delay it for the time being, just so it will be great when it comes out. So they were taking the short-term pain for the long-term gain. That's how I see it. So it just seems like Apple has learned quite a bit from the botched Apple Intelligence rollout. So it's great to see the executives being upfront and honest. And, this also is why we didn't see much at WWDC about Apple Intelligence. Like, we saw the stuff for developers and just minor things about Apple Intelligence, but it was not even close to a major talking point like it was last year. And I'm sure Apple is working on a lot of Apple Intelligence stuff under the table, under the hood, but they didn't announce it ahead of time, which, if they didn't get that backlash last year, maybe they would have. So of course, I'm still upset that we don't have the Apple Intelligence features. I'm never going to give Apple a pass for that, but at least now we know that Apple is going to be more upfront with that, and they're not going to announce these features well in advance anymore. And by the way, some people still seem to be confused by this revamped Siri. This is not going to be like a chatbot. This is not going to be like a competitor to Gemini. It's not going to be a competitor to ChatGPT. This is not going to be a chatbot. It's just an updated version of Siri. Now, LLM Siri, that will be more like ChatGPT, but that's not coming next year. That's most likely coming in 2027 at the earliest. So a lot of people are saying, oh, the competition is going to catch up. There's not really any competition unless you're just talking about, phone makers doing stuff on device like Samsung. That's different. But this upgraded Siri is not intended to be a competitor to ChatGPT. And then finally, we have a new update on the upcoming AirTag's 2nd generation. So this comes from Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, and he mentioned that the new AirTag is nearly ready to launch. So the AirTag has been a major hit, and you guys know I always cover the AirTag stories here on the channel, and this 2nd generation AirTag is going going to be getting some upgrades. So number one, it's going to have the second gen ultra wideband chip. So it's going to have up to 3 times longer tracking range compared to the first gen AirTag. It's also going to have integration with Vision Pro and spatial computing, and it's also going to be more tamper proof for the speaker. So a lot of people, if they were trying to stalk somebody, they would kind of pry open the AirTag and take the speaker out so the person wouldn't hear it beeping, so they wouldn't know where it was. That will be addressed in the second gen AirTag as well, so people can't use them as much for stalking. So that is the latest with iOS 26 and WWDC 2025. If you want to read more of my thoughts on all of this software and WWDC as a whole, and also Apple's stance on AI, check out my latest newsletter issue. I wrote quite a few words on that will be linked down in the description below. And if you're not already subscribed to the Apple Den newsletter, I send out one newsletter every week with the latest in the world of Apple, along with my take on it. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed this video, this is one of the longest Apple Weeklies I've ever done. I love it. But if you guys enjoyed it, I would appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up. Also, make sure you hit subscribe down below so you don't miss out on next week's Apple Weekly episode, where we'll be diving into even more iOS 26 features and changes, and of course, some new stories. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.